Chapter 31 of Free Air. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Free Air by Sinclair Lewis. Chapter 31. The Kitchen Intimate. Milt had become used to the Gilson drawing room. He was no longer uncomfortable in the presence of its sleek fatness, though at first, not knowing that there were such resources as interior decorators, he had been convinced that, to have created the room, the Gilsons must have known everything in the world. Now he glanced familiarly at its white paneling, its sconces like silver candlesticks, the inevitable davenport inevitably backed by an amethyst-shaded piano lamp, and a table crowded with silver boxes and picture frames. He liked the winsomeness of light upon velvet and polished wood. It was not the drawing room, but the kitchen that dismayed him. In Schoenstrom he had known that there must somewhere be beautiful parlors, but he had trusted his experience of kitchens. Kitchens, according to his philosophy, were small, smelly rooms of bare floors, and provided with one oilcloth-covered table, one stove, the front draft always broken and propped up with the lid lifter, one cupboard with panes of tin pierced in rosettes, and one stack of dirty dishes. But the Gilson kitchen had the efficiency of a laboratory and the superciliousness of a hairdresser's booth. With awe, Milt beheld walls of white tiles, a cork floor, a gas range large as a hotel stove, a ceiling-high refrigerator of enamel and nickel, zinc-topped tables, and a case of utensils like surgeon's knives. It frightened him. It made more hopelessly unapproachable than ever the Alexandrian luxury of the great Gilsons. The Vanderbilts' kitchen must be like this, and maybe King George's. He was viewing the kitchen upon the occasion of an intimate Sunday evening supper to which he had been yearningly invited by Mrs. Gilson. The maids were all out. The Gilsons and Claire, Milt and Jeff Saxton, shoutingly prepared their own supper. While Mrs. Gilson scrambled eggs and made coffee, the others set the table and brought cold ham and a bowl of salad from the icebox. Milt had intended to be a silent but deft servitor. When he had heard that he was to come to supper with the returned Mr. Geoffrey Saxton, he had first been panic-shaken, then resolved. He'd let old iron-faced Saxton do the high and mighty. Let him stand around and show off his clothes and adjectives the way he did at Flathead Lake. But he, Milt, would be on the job. He'd help get supper and calmly ignore Jeff's rudeness. Only, Jeff wasn't rude. He greeted Milt with, "Ah, Daggett, this is so nice." And Milt had no chance to help. It was Jeff who anticipated him, and with a pleasant, "Let me get that, I'm kitchen broke," snatched up the cold ham and salad. It was Jeff who found the supper plates, while Milt was blunderingly wondering how any one family could use a whole furniture store full of different kinds of china. It was Jeff who sprang to help Claire wheel in the tea wagon, and so captured the chance to speak to her, for which Milt had been maneuvering these 5 minutes. When they were settled, Jeff glowed at him and respectfully offered, "I thought of you so often, Daggett, on a recent little jaunt of mine. You'd have been helpful." "Where was that?" asked Milt suspiciously, wondering and waiting to see whether you could take cold ham in your fingers. "Oh, in Alaska." "In Alaska?" Milt was dismayed. "Yes, just a business trip there. There's something I wish you'd advise me about." He was humble, and Milt was uneasy. He grumbled, "What's that?" "I've been wondering whether it would be possible to use wireless telephony in Alaska. But I'm such a dub at electricity. Do you know, what would be the cost of installing a wireless telephone plant with a 100-mile radius?" "Gee, I don't know." "Oh, so sorry. Well, I wonder if you can tell me about wireless telegraphy, then." "Nope, I don't know anything about that either." Milt had desperately tried to make his answer gracious, but somehow he hated this devil's obsequiousness more than he had his chilliness at Flathead Lake. He had a feeling that the Gilsons had delightfully kicked each other under the table, that for all her unchanging smile, Claire was unhappy, and she was so far off, a white wraith floating beyond his frantic grasp. "It doesn't matter, really. But I didn't know. So you've started in the engineering school at the University of Washington," Saxton was purring. "Have you met Gid Childers there, son of old Senator Childers? Charming people." "I've seen him. He has a Stutz." "No, his is the Mercer," sighed Milt. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't quite keep the awe out of his voice. People with Mercers. Claire seemed to be trying to speak. She made a delicate, feminine, Claire-esque approximation of clearing her throat, but Jeff ignored her, and with almost osculatory affection continued to Milt, "Do let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. We're acquainted with 2 or 3 of your engineering faculty at the office. They write in about various things. Do you happen to know Dr. Filgren?" "Oh, yes, say, he's a wonder," Milt was betrayed into exclaiming. "Yes, good chap, I believe. He's been trying to get a job with us. We may give him one. Just tell him you're a friend of mine, and that he's to give you any help he can." Milt choked on a thanks. "And now that we're just the family here together, how goes the financial side? Can I be of any assistance in introducing you to some engineering firm where you could do a little work on the side? You could make quite a little money." So confoundedly affectionate and paternal. Milt said irritable, "Thanks, but I don't need to do any work. I've got plenty of money." "How pleasant." Saxton's voice was smooth as marshmallow. "You're fortunate. I had quite a struggle to get through Princeton." Wasn't Mr. Gilson contrasting Saxton's silk shirt with Milt's darned cotton covering, and in light of that contrast, chuckling at Milt's boast and Saxton's modesty? Milt became overheated. His scalp prickled and his shoulder blades were damp. As Saxton turned from him and crooned to Claire, "More ham, honey?" Milt hated himself. He was in much of the dramatic but undesirable position of a man in pajamas, not very good pajamas, who has been locked out in the hotel corridor by the slamming of his door. He was in the frame of mind of a mongrel, of a real boy's dog at a Madison Square dog show. He had a faint, shrewd suspicion of Saxton's game, but what could he do about it? He felt even more out of place when the family forgot him and talked about people of whom he had never heard. He sat alone on an extremely distant desert isle and ate cold ham and wished he were in the Schoenstrom. Claire had recovered her power of speech. She seemed to be trying to bring him into the conversation so that the family might appreciate him. She hesitated and thought with creased brows, and brought out, oh, Milt, how much is gas selling at now?" Milt left that charming and intimate supper party at 9. He said, "Got to work on my analytical geometry," as though it was a lie, and he threw "Good night" at Saxton as though he hated his kind, good benefactor, and when he tried to be gracious to Mrs. Gilson, the best he could get out was, "Thanks for inviting me." They expansively saw him to the door. Just as he thought that he had escaped, Saxton begged, "Oh, Daggett, I was arguing with a chap. What color are Holstein Friesian cattle? Red?" "Black and white," Milt said eagerly. He heard Mrs. Gilson giggle. He stood on the terrace wiping his forehead and, without the least struggle, finally and irretrievably admitting that he would never see Claire Boltwood or any of her friends again. Not ever. He had received from Mrs. Gilson a note inviting him to share their box at the first night of a 3-night opera season. He had spent half a day in trying to think of a courteously rude way of declining. A straggly little girl came up from the candy shop below his room, demanding, "Say, are you Mr. Daggett? Say, there's some woman wants to talk to you on our telephone. Say, tell them we ain't supposed to be no messenger office. You ain't supposed to call no upstairs people on our telephone. We ain't supposed to leave the store and go trotting all over town to—" "Gee, a nickel, gee. Thank you. Don't mind what Ma says. She's always kicking." On the telephone he heard Claire's voice in an agitated, "Milt, meet me downtown at the Imperial Motion Picture Theater right away. Something I've got to tell you. I'll be in the lobby. Hurry." When he bolted in, she was already in the lobby, agitatedly looking over a frame of stills. She ran to him, hooked her fingers in his lapel, poured out, "They've invited you to the opera? I want you to come and put it all over them. I'm almost sure there's a plot. They want to show me that you aren't used to tiaras and saxophones and creaking dowagers and tulle. Beat 'em. Beat 'em. Come to the opera and be awfully aloof and supercilious. You can. Yes, you can. And be sure, wear evening clothes. Now I've got to hurry. But don't disappoint me. I depend on you. Oh, say you will." "I will." She was gone, whisking into the Gilson limousine. He was in a glow at